But India is a country that's clearly developing.
There was a tariff, there was a pullback. There was a tariff, there was a pullback.
And then it's 25 tariffs, then it becomes 50, then you have the problem with the gold, the copper market, the commodities, everything is moving because they say, what the fuck is happening in the world?
Trump had a huge issue with Tim Cook of Apple and Elon Musk of Tesla making in India.
I've been in banking for longer than I care to remember, basically. We have written a book, The New World Economy, talk about the tariffs of Donald Trump, all the geopolitics.
From being best friends with Modi, Trump comes in and says that India is a dead economy.
I think India is something that is remarkable at this moment, and that needs stable leadership. India has more people than China, and when you steal from one person, it's dangerous because you can go to jail. If you take ideas from 100 or 200 different books or people, well, you can call it research.
Truce between India and Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. Do you believe that India's reluctance to acknowledge Trump's role in mitigating the war that was about to, burst into a nuclear sphere, is that to do with the 50% tariffs, which are the highest in the world as of? So, what is it that Trump really wants? Hello and welcome to the NeUp Founder Focus, where we have with us Mr. Philippe Gijsels. So I will leave the forum to him to talk a little about himself because he is an established banker. He's somebody from Brussels. We're in a 3-hour time gap, 3.5 hours to be precise, but he has graciously agreed to do this for us. And we'll be talking everything about Trump tariffs, about the India and the world economy situation, and also how this geopolitical situation is going to affect the stock markets. Thank you so much, Philippe, for doing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
I just want you to first talk a little bit about the kind of weight that you bring in. And also, before the podcast, you were talking about the book that you've written. So I want you to, flaunt a little bit about those skills first, and then we'll dive into the deeper questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks for having me. Indeed, I've been in banking for longer than I care to remember. Basically, I started out when I was 12 years old. I'm 55 today, so you can do the maths. So it's quite a bit of time I've been in markets. Now, if experience is a sum of all the mistakes that you've made, I've made quite a bit of them. So that means that I have quite a bit of experience. And when I look at the world, and then like you said so graciously, Koen de Leus and I, we have written a book, The New World Economy in 5 Trends, that was in the summer reading list of the Financial Times last year. So it has been very well received, and it talks about the world that we see. We talk about the tariffs, about Donald Trump, about all the geopolitics, and the idea is to look. Everybody looks at the world, our clients, the press, everybody we talk to, and they look at it with amazement because they say, what the fuck is happening in the world? Excuse me for my language. And what is happening? And it looks also very random. And then it's 25 tariffs, then it becomes 50, then you have the problem with the gold, the copper market, the commodities, everything is moving. And yeah, it looks very random, but the idea of the book was, and we've written it about a year ago, and honestly, I would not change a word of what we have written because I'm even more convinced what's in it than I was a year ago. There is a lot of structure in this, and we built on ideas that we found everywhere because you cannot look around me because I blurred the screen, because my wife will not let me show all the mess around me because there are a lot of books. So when you write a book, you typically borrow, I will not call it steal, but you typically borrow from a lot of people. And when you steal from one person, it's dangerous because you can go to jail. If you take ideas from 100 or 200 different books or people, well, you can call it research. So we did a lot of research in our book. Particularly like is the Four Turnings Here by Neil Howe. 2 years ago, okay, everybody knew it a bit, but now it's everywhere on podcast and so on. And if you read that book, well, you realize we've been here before, because a fourth turning is a period of a very big geopolitical turmoil, of unfortunately wars, civil wars, trade wars. So it's a moment in time that the people do not get along, or countries do not get along anymore. And unfortunately, the previous one was the Second World War. 80 years before that, it was the American Civil War. And before that, you have to go back to the United Kingdom with the War of the Roses, the Armada crisis, and the Glorious Revolution. But the idea is, each and every time that you have a crisis, there are about 80 years in between. And everybody who lived through the horror of the Second World War, well, then people say, we're never going to do that again. And then you start to build the United Nations, you start to build the trade organizations, the health organizations. Europe was built after the Second World War, the European Union, and so on. And then, unfortunately, after 80 years, everybody who has lived through the previous crisis is unfortunately dead or very old. And then people start again. And we're in that environment. And in that environment, you understand the trade wars, and you understand also that you have all the conflicts everywhere. And also what Donald Trump, in a way, is doing is destroying the organizations that were built in the previous cycle. And there is also, because this sounds all very dark, but there is also hope, because it's a book of hope that we have written. After a fourth turning comes a first turning, and that's typically the new generation that rebuilds the world. But we still, unfortunately, have a couple of years to go before we're there.
Of course, Philippe. And what I want to focus here on is, the knowledge economy, that now we have optimism. There is an information overload thanks to the internet. The same networks that connect us, like you and I got in touch despite being across continents and across time zones through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a space where people network, but Facebook is a space, or Instagram is now becoming a space, or YouTube for that matter, and Twitter, of course, since a certain Elon Musk took over, it has become a space of division, right? There is a lot of polarization that we see in this world. Now, one of the polarizing leaders who happened to be somebody from our space, who was a CEO before he transcended into being the president of the United States, is Donald Trump. And somebody who works in the mental health space, I've seen his behavior. It's a clear narcissistic behavior. There is no two doubts about Trump serving himself, being a self-serving individual, which is not bad if you start serving yourself, but don't harm others. But here, his Liberation Day tariffs, which have kicked in on April 2, when I was working for another organization covering geopolitics, we've seen the nitty-gritties of how the Liberation Day tariffs unfolded. There was a tariff, there was a pullback. There was a tariff, there was a pullback. Then the tariffs became a threat mechanism. They became like a sword or like a knife held to your throat. So I want to understand that from being best friends with Modi, suddenly Donald Trump in his second presidency, after J.D. Vance, who is to be India's son-in-law because his wife comes from
Yep.
India. There's a lot of equation, we've hosted the leaders in the past and, presently as well. J.D. Vance was in India recently. Modi has been to the US. He was one of the first leaders to meet Trump when he took office in January. In February, PM Modi was in the US. He also met Elon Musk, and now Tesla is in India. It first came to Mumbai, now it is open to Delhi, where I live. Let us come to the Liberation Day tariffs. A little bit of backstory for the readers who are, for the viewers who are unaware. Trump had a huge issue with Tim Cook of Apple and Elon Musk of Tesla making in India. And he had imposed 34% tariffs on China, which were the highest in the Liberation Day tariff table on April 2. These tariffs were then lowered. They actually went to triple digits and then they were lowered because there was an escalation from both. Now, all of a sudden, like it just happened, like Trump woke on the different side of the bed one morning and he decided to choose violence for India. Now, if we study geopolitics, the Pahalgam attack and Operation Sindoor has a lot to do with Trump's anger towards India, because there are three countries, including Pakistan, which are sponsoring for Trump's Nobel. And here India is saying that no, you had no role to play in mediating a truce between India and Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. So, do you believe, Philippe, even as you're a banker, you also read the news, you also know Trump, and you've written about him? Do you believe that India's reluctance to acknowledge Trump's role in mitigating the war that was about to, burst into a nuclear sphere when it comes to India and Pakistan, is that to do with the 50% tariffs, which are the highest in the world as of now?
Well, that's a difficult question. There's a lot to unpack in everything that you said. So I we'll start from the beginning. I liked your remark a lot about being connected over the internet, over LinkedIn, over continents. We talk, we share ideas. I think that's fantastic. That's an opportunity that we did not really have before COVID in a way. So that's good. But also the point that you make that X and LinkedIn and other places can also be a point of division between people. And that's very strong when you look at the United States. Not so long ago, in Reagan times, in Carter times, and so on, in the presidency, okay, they discussed, but they weren't, the Democrats and the Republicans, they weren't across the aisle, like they say. They were together. They used to have illegal poker games together on the Friday evening. They would cut a deal. There were no cameras. So they would discuss in the Senate, but then they would have a pint of beer or something, and then they would work things out. Today, you look at a very deeply divided society where each have their own media. When you look at CNN, you're probably a Democrat. When you look at Fox, you're probably a Republican. And these people do not talk to each other anymore. And that's a very big issue. So it's a very interesting point that you raised. So everything that we have in terms of new means of communication clearly can unite us, but they can also divide us. And that's unfortunately what's happening to a large extent in the United States. That's one point. Now, if you look at the world, and I will come to India in a second, I think that Donald Trump, and that's maybe risky for me to say, but it's more not a cause, but it's more a consequence. I think this time frame brings about leaders as Donald Trump is. And you have a world, and that's extremely important. That's very important for India as well, which I love. And Kun, my co-author, visited India and he traveled through India, so he knows India better than I do. But India is a country that's clearly developing, where there are a lot of interesting things going on. And even for our clients, we're invested in the stock market and so on, because we think, even though it's reasonably high and probably reasonably expensive, that we like, we want to participate basically in this growth story. But if you look at the world again, I think realize that we come from a situation that's very unusual. Typically, you do not have one world power. Typically, there are a number of world powers around the world. But we come from a world that I would call the Pax Americana. So after the Second World War, okay, you had the two blocks. You had the Soviet Union and you had the United States. Then the United States won basically the nuclear war or the Cold War, I should call it. And then basically the United States became the only country in the world to control everything. They policed the world, and you had a Pax Americana. It means everybody could do free trade, everything was good, and the United States would police basically the world. And that has changed now, because with Donald Trump, he's redrawing America first. He's becoming more isolist. He's more becoming, the United States becomes on his own. And you have, of course, China is rising as a world power, because this trade war is more China-America, I think, than anything else. And you also see it's very hard, because this morning he extended the negotiations by 90 days again. It's very hard because China has the power of the rare earths and of all the commodities. So it's not so easy to impose a lot of sanctions on China, because China can retaliate. For Europe, for example, that's more difficult. We have to more or less accept what he says, because we have no clear threats that we can make. Now, in this world, and that's why we also think that India is very well positioned, when you have no longer one center of the world, but you have different centers, it gives the opportunity to countries like in India, like Vietnam and others, to navigate between these powers and do actually very well. But that was, of course, until the tariffs started to come in, which are, of course, extremely harsh and extremely high, and are very counterproductive, because each and every economist you will ask will say that the tariffs are horrible for everybody, also for the United States, because at the end of the day, it are the US companies and the US consumers especially that are going to pay for this and create inflation as well in the United States. So it's not a good idea. But I think, once again, this is extremely random, and this can change very quickly as well, because if President Modi has a good talk with Donald Trump for as far as that's possible, these would be lifted again, and then he could start to impose sanctions on somebody else. But it goes back and forth. Good example is what happened to the copper market. And all of a sudden you would have 25% tariffs or something on copper, or 50 even. And then everybody was stocking copper in the United States. And then after a couple of weeks, they say, it was all a joke. And all you have 100,000 of tons copper lying around in the United States because everybody stocked. So you disrupt the world economy very badly. And I think, India is a very proud country, and I think it's very justified. It's logical that India does not want the United States to interfere in its domestic business. But that's what Donald Trump does. And that makes it complicated. In my part of the world, and then what I look at economics and I look at markets. This creates, of course, a lot of volatility because, if you have a world, I always compare this with tectonic plates, and they used to move all in the same direction at the same speed.
Definitely.
Now all these different parts move in a different direction at a different speed, and of course they will collide. And collide means that you see big movements in the euro dollar, or you see big movements in commodity prices or in interest rates. So we live in this volatile world that's no longer unipolar. But at the end of the day, I think that India, and we write about it in the book as well, before this all happened, that India is one of the countries also with very favorable demographics and so on, compared to China, where the demographics are quite horrible, like they are in Europe, by the way. So I think this is short-term volatility, but this does not take away, I think, from the long-term opportunities that are still clearly there. But this is annoying. I can imagine that this for India is extremely annoying, like it's annoying for Europe and like it's annoying for a lot of places in the world.
So now that you're talking of Europe, the first kind of damages started coming to the European Union, where, there were direct targets to Macron, there were direct targets to Keir Starmer, though US and UK were the first to broker a deal. So there's a lot at play, when it comes to Europe. Now let us, read the minds of the leaders that I've studied. The Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is somebody who's a liberal. But if you see his operations, he actually works like Trump. He just chooses to remain quiet. He was advisor to Justin Trudeau. Now, Justin Trudeau is a family dynast leader, very good with his optics, if you have to compare him to Obama, you can. There is a way of speaking and there is a way of appeal. And that was the liberal way of doing things, just like the Democrats. The liberals and the Democrats are the same in a way. Now, Mark Carney is very much protectionist at this point for Canada. Canada was bearing the brunt of a lot of tariffs because of the whole border issue. So Trump was justifying tariffs, okay? But now everybody knows that they're unjustified. Like even a layman knows that Trump is just waking on one side of the bed and taking decisions. The next morning, his decisions change. Nobody is able to trust his decisions. His own economic advisor, who has to be, but the Fed chief is at loggerheads with Trump. He is, annoyed, and he is openly talking to the media and saying that I do not know what to say about this. I can recommend that tariffs are not a favorable situation. And I can tell you, for Indian democracy, the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, and the Indian government, they work in tandem. They always work as an advisor to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's vision trickles down to the central bank. In all senses, you can't have a clash when it comes to democracy. You have to work in a vision. And that has worked for India. For 15 years, we have the same leader. Of course, there have been questions of democracy and a lot of other things that are coming up in the news as well. But I, as an Indian citizen, from an economic standpoint, having been a business journalist, I can tell you that we are in a good position because we have a stable leadership. Now, even Keir Starmer of the UK, Georgia Meloni of Italy, all of these leaders are firebrand leaders. Even if they come from sort of a liberal or a democratic background, the Labour Party in the UK, for example, they have a strategy. The strategy is to keep their country first. That is the world order that we understand. Now, India also had a vision of Vishwaguru. Just 3 days from today, we have our Independence Day. That is the 76th Independence Day. And the 75th, which was, the Platinum Jubilee, I believe. we said that this is Amrit Kal. This is the time when we are going to reap the fruits of all our pains and all the benefits that we should be getting, and we should become superpowers. Vishwa Guru means superpowers. We should be leading the world the way the US is policing the world, which his press secretary has openly said that Trump is the sheriff, and the world has to stand in order. India has never acted like a sheriff. India has always tried to protect its interests, at the same time helping its neighbors. So one of the Sri Lankan MPs also stopped his other fellows from mocking at India on the tariffs and saying, when we were in trouble, when there was an economic crisis due to the lapse of tourism in Sri Lanka, India pitched in $4 billion. And India, is a developing country. We have a long way to go. There is a representation in Hollywood and Bollywood and other areas where India is shown as a poor country, but we're not poor. You can see me. I have a good internet connection. We have the best UPI in the world. We have stock market investments from below middle class stratas as well. So we have a very aware audience which is connected with the internet. We have an internet revolution which is talked by Netflix as well. And amidst all this, Trump comes in and says that India is a dead economy. So, you have validated this point in the last question, that India is not a dead economy. It is a blueprint of how companies can be successful, because we have a huge consumer market, and India is struggling to be a producer because of these tariffs. Because the minute India decides that we want to do something, we want to make in India, we want to skill in India, we want to do this and that, India was grappling like before 1991, when our economy was closed down, protectionist because of the whole British Raj that, happened in 1947. We actually became very protectionist, but there was a lot of government corruption. We opened up our markets in 1991. We were very much Americanized. There was a lot of soft power play. There are still kids in my generation or elders to me who have grown up watching Friends and How I Met Your Mother. And through that, the McDonald's culture, the Domino's culture, we have forgotten our meals. Now, I have a US client for my mental health practice, and she does yoga every morning. She eats clean. She doesn't eat non-veg. So that is something that Indians are losing out on. Yoga is more practiced in Canada than it is practiced by Indians, because somehow there is a PR of shame that India is not cool. India smells of curry. India is this, and Indians have dark skin, and Indians are that, and Indians are racially abused and killed across the world. Even though out of the big four, the FANG, we have Google and Microsoft being led by Indians. But why did the brain drain happen? That India could not create opportunities. I just had a podcast with somebody, and he told me that he moved to the Emirates from India. He was, he was an Indian. He migrated to the US. He came back to India to bring change, but there were some democratic and bureaucratic issues that he moved to the Emirates, and they gave him a golden visa for free, because there is acknowledgement of effort. My own family is somebody who is leading McKinsey at the South Arabia level. So why aren't Indians investing in India is a story for Indians to delve into. But whenever India tries to have stable leadership, tries to be strong, we've seen the US aid was being exposed by the Doge, by Elon Musk, and there was a significant investment to destabilize democracy in India through some journalists, through some politicians. There's a whole backstory there. But talking of today, we've got the 50% tariffs. And been told in many languages that we cannot make in India. So, if you had to think like an Indian strategist, maybe for one day you were the governor of our central bank, how would you make sure that these Trump tariffs do not affect the everyday Indian?
That's not an easy one, but you've raised a couple of very interesting points, and we'll come back to a question in a second. Stable leadership, that's extremely, extremely important. And I think there India is a very big exception, because what happens typically also in a fourth turning, and I won quite a bit of bottles making that bet over the Christmas period. I said Donald Trump is going to win. And Donald Trump is going to win the elections. And I said he's not only going to win the elections, he's going to take the House and the Senate as well. because that's typically what you expect. It's not that I wanted this, but just it was a prediction. That's what I do for a living. You make predictions, you make bets for your clients. That's extremely important, because in a fourth turning, typically, and you mentioned Carney, you mentioned Trudeau, you mentioned the UK, typically in a fourth turning, sitting presidents, sitting governments, sitting parties or parties that are into power, they lose the election. That has happened all around the world. Trudeau lost, and then Carney played it very cleverly, opposing himself to Donald Trump, and then winning the elections again. So he's also a liberal. So they stayed, Trudeau is gone, but he stayed in power like that. But in the UK, it were the Conservatives that were into power, and the Tories, and then Labour came in. Everywhere across Europe, in Germany, Olaf Scholz lost. In Belgium, all of a sudden, which is right wing more to the north and left wing to the south, because we have two parts, a very small country, but in two parts. All of a sudden, in the south, the right wing won. In Holland, you saw Wilders, which is a very extremist party, that won. In France, you have on the one hand the very right wing winning, and on the opposite side, the very left wing winning. So you see that all across the world. And in India, it was an exception, because Mr. Modi was able to stay in power. Okay, he lost some seats, but he stayed in power. And that's extremely important in a fourth turning, that you get, in a way, that stable leadership. And I can only stress, and maybe you do not see it like that, because you are inside India. But if you look at the rest of the world, I think India is something that is remarkable at this moment, and that means stable leadership, because everywhere it's changing. Now, if you take this logic one step further, the midterms in the United States are not so far away. So it could be that Donald Trump loses the midterms. That would already means that he would lose some power in the Senate and in the House. And if this logic is taken one step further, the next elections, if the Democrats are able to put somebody forward that's acceptable to the middle of America, then typically that guy or girl lady will win the elections. So, but I think the stability is very important. It was a little bit unfortunate. I've always been a big fan of Mr. Rajan, who was at the central bank before he went back to, I think, I don't know what university it was. I think
Chicago University.
Yeah, he's once again teaching. But I thought that was a very strong tandem, Mr. Modi with Rajan. Yeah, that's the best it gets in terms of president and then central bank, of course. Now, what can India do? Well, I think this is still a blip on the long-term history and the long-term radar screen. Okay, this will be a couple of years, but this will not take away of the long-term opportunities that are still there. And in Europe is exactly the same. And maybe, and that's maybe the good thing, in a fourth turning as well, okay, people tend to move to their own tribe, to their own country, to their own people. They do not cooperate any more or less on a worldwide scale. But I can only talk from Europe. The European Union is still very divided. We work together from time to time, but we do not have a capital union. We still have a lot of borders. We still have a lot of internal tariffs. So we have a lot of things going on. And typically when the outside puts pressure on Europe, typically they tend to work together. And what we have in Europe now, Germany is spending again. We have sort of a Marshall Plan. So there's a lot of money coming into the economy. And what you said is it's so extremely important. India and Europe and all countries basically should, in a way, invest in their own people and their own economy. And I can only testify to what's happening in Europe. We have a trade surplus with the United States, so he's very angry about that, of course. But we get a lot of dollars in. But what we do not invest these dollars in our own economy. No, we take these dollars, we add our own savings, and then we buy US debt, and we buy the Nasdaq and the European and the US technology companies. To give you one figure, if you look at the MSCI World, that's the world index for the stock markets, is at the moment 75% United States. Because the entire world invests in the United States. The US is not 75% of the world economy, but they have 75% of the market cap, because everybody puts money there. And that's what you hear, that American exceptionalism, where everybody wants to invest in American debt and in American companies, which is justified to a certain extent because we must admit they have some fantastic companies as well. But if we could manage as Europe or as in India to invest in our own universities, our own people, our own economy, well, you would have a different world map or a different world situation in the world. And I think at the end of the day, that's where Donald Trump is going to lose, because now he is extremely powerful. He can put tariffs on everyone. He tries to bully everyone everywhere. But the point is that people start to think each and every time he does a tweet like that, somewhere there is one country, one investor, one fund that says, do I really have to have so much of my capital in the United States? And gradually that capital is moving around the world, and that will help. And if you look at performance, because then you're back in my world, if you look at stock market performance, all stock markets around the world have lagged the United States for the last 15 years because all the money went to the United States.
Yes.
And since the beginning of the year, money is gradually coming back to Europe, to emerging markets, to other places. And I think we're in a world, and we bet on that for our clients, that money is once again more evenly divided over the globe. And that will in the end represent opportunities for a lot of countries. And then maybe I'm going to say something very stupid, but we're just talking, so I'm going to say it anyway. Maybe this whole thing is a little bit a blessing in disguise.
Yes.
That we see in 3-4 years' time. This was exactly for Europe that I'm talking, the kick that we needed to get our act together. And there I also think, I do not know India so well as you do, obviously, but if you were to manage to keep all your talents inside and you were able to keep all the money inside and invest it, then you would build something. And I think eventually that's going to happen in a lot of places around the world.
Of course. So, Philippe, my next question to you is about how basically the Russia-Ukraine play is also disrupting the whole tariff situation, because, you've seen Trump enter the zone and just become a peacemaker from somebody who has a very violent personality, who likes to pick fights and, have damaging attacks to people. He's suddenly, playing the role of the saint and calling himself Pope. He's saying that, I should be Pope. But this person is, first lashing out at Zelensky. Then suddenly he switches tactics and, gives military to Ukraine, corners Russia, and now is attacking India and other economies for buying oil from Russia. So, what is it that Trump really wants? Because there were speculations of Trump and Putin having some kind of a negotiation for Trump to be president in 2016, to all of that being refuted, to now Trump taking a very protectionist stance for the US and against Russia. So, of course, it's the sheriff of the world, but again, Russia is rising to the ranks, and after the war situation, there is this threat that is being created through negative PR or through tariff tactics. So, what is it that Trump really wants?
Well, I think it's once again very often a bit random. Now, it's the first time in many, many years, unfortunately, that we have a war on our hands in Europe with the invasion of Russia and Ukraine. It's a terrible situation. It's like Gaza. It's like a lot of people get killed. So you hope that it ends in a certain way. Of course, meetings are coming up probably between Donald Trump and Mr. Putin. They will try to bargain some sort of a deal, but that will also mean that Ukraine will probably lose some territory, which probably Ukraine is not going to agree to. So the last word has not been said on this, but I think it's once again very much about positioning, about geopolitical power. And it's also very much about commodities, because Russia, of course, is very commodity rich in a lot of commodities, but also oil and gas, mostly, which India buys quite a bit of. Ukraine, it's almost like the periodic table of Mendeleev, because there is so much in the ground, like in Greenland, which is very interesting for everyone. And at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about the situation with China,
Yes.
The extension of 90 days. Yeah, the United States, like a lot of countries in the world, like also Europe, we need a lot of these commodities. So commodities will once again become extremely important on a world scale. We invest in them as well, also in the companies that mine them, because we think that commodity prices will rise. That's a very important topic in our book as well. We think that we're at the eve of one of the largest commodity bull markets in world history. And it's a demand thing, but it's also a supply thing, that there is not enough supply in a lot of cases for these things. So who owns these things have a very good negotiating position. And once again, coming back to this fourth turning thing, the last fourth turning was the Second World War. Japan entered the Second World War because they did not have access to commodities anymore. So as long as everybody trades and is friendly with one another, commodities flow freely across the world. When people start to monopolize them and use them also as a strategic weapon against other countries, well, it becomes a problem. So therefore, I think that all countries, India, also the European Union, everywhere in the world should think about the safety in commodities. And there is the one thing about the climate change, which is of course very important for the electrical transition and so on, but also having this sort of resource independence. And some countries are better positioned than others in this. So I think it's a lot to do with redrawing the map of the world. Also, Russia clearly wants to probably get once again more powerful, like they were in the Soviet Union days. United States doing the same thing. But at the end of the day, commodities become extremely important. And then you get to friendshoring and nearshoring and have your production, have your access to commodities in places where you trust basically your companion or the country you deal with. So this is not the world anymore like we used to know it. It's once again a very fragmented world. And also where countries, and I'm just thinking up loud, get more involved. China does it already for a very long time, but now the United States and other countries are doing it very well. The industrial policy of a country. Before, you would have a world where you let the companies do the business and the government does not interfere too much. But today, governments are actively interfering in all kinds of industries, all kinds of positionings and so on. So this is a totally, and that's very important for the audience to get, I think, this is a totally different world in terms of economics, in terms of geopolitics than it was before. And I cannot stress enough the importance of the commodities everywhere, and for a country like India as well, who needs a lot of these commodities for its development. Maybe countries like in India and also like the Eurozone and other places in the world should start to look also at other places in the world where you can get access to commodities if you do not have them in the ground ourselves. In Europe, we do not have a lot in our soil. The US has a lot of it, but they're not mining it. You should not forget that until the early 70s, that's already some time ago, the US was very strong in rare earths. And so they have a lot of rare earths basically in the soil, in the ground, but they're not mining them. And to get them out will take some time. But you see this whole supply chains and this whole industrial change being redirected and changed forever. So there are also, if we talk about investments, and that's of course the least of our worries in a world where all these horrible things happen. But if you say, okay, how do you invest in this? Well, if you find some nice resources in places that are politically safe, I think they're a good investment at the moment.
Of course. Now, Philippe, when you talk about a country's, the USP that a country has, I believe India has a lot of population and skilled talent. Okay, I'm talking about skilled talent here. So we have somehow become the BPO of the world. Like when we started, there are so many companies, and even Musk has spoken about how Indian labor is, should deserve an H1B. And it's very odd that Vivek Ramaswamy from Indian roots doesn't stand with it because he's a Republican. So, of course, it's the politics. And once you enter the place, it's the power dynamics. You don't want others to also follow suit. Now, I was just having a podcast with Guru Prasad Saule, who is very important in the US India trade relation spectrum. And he told me, like, this is something in the open forum, but, he made me realize that the American party, which Musk has now proposed, has an Indian treasurer, which means that Indians are there everywhere. In your own company, I'm sure that there will be people who will have positions of power, who will be probably in the management and senior management roles, who are Indians. So we have the skills of the world. Now, Indians were always lacking in marketing. This is something that I was discussing with another great dignitary who I was telling you about, who got the golden visa from the UAE. He was telling me of how Indians are very coy and shy, have been taught about sacrifice, but you as an author or a CEO or a management person, I as a CEO have to market myself in order to generate sales. It is as proportional. If you have a lime shop, you've got to show, you've got to give pamphlets and flyers that okay, I have lemonade, you have to come and buy it. So India has always been lacking in its own branding and marketing. We have given exported goods, and basmati rice has been patented by the US, which is sad. Basmati rice is our property, but somebody else patented it because we were not quick enough. So that has happened with a lot of inventions and a lot of, European inventors and American inventors. Sometimes merit does not count. What counts is, having the foot in the door, having the first access, having the first strategy in mind. So, of course, Make in India has been a brand in India for probably 10 to 15 years now, but it's not really flown. And of course, you're saying that this is a silver lining, the same way people thought that even COVID, despite the deaths, was a silver lining for
Mm.
technological advancement. So, whenever you have a situation, you get time to introspect. Like Europe can come together against one, big villain that has come into the world. And, he is attacking everyone. And even his own countrymen are not feeling safe about it, because you don't know when the next attack will come. Will it be on a community? Will it be on a religion? Will it be on another sect? We don't really know what Trump is thinking about. Nobody can predict his behavior, and that is what makes him dangerous. That is like the exact definition of dangerous. When you cannot predict patterns, that is something unpredictable, and something unpredictable is dangerous. That can be a natural calamity as well. So in that respect, I want to understand that from a small country like Belgium, to a larger country like India, how can we go the China way and actually have government and private interests aligned? Because now you see that entrepreneurs are acting as multinational companies. So a Tim Cook getting benefits in India will try to make in India, but Trump is stopping him. Trump is asking him to incentivize the kind of access. And we saw Bezos and Zuckerberg and everybody, the doors were rolling of the White House, and all the entrepreneurs were just paying homage. Now, an interesting aspect here is that Hyundai Motors, which is a South Korean company, was among the first automakers to invest in the US, showing direct allegiance to Trump so that the operations don't stop there. So, and now you're seeing that the attacks don't stop there. Jensen Huang of Nvidia, or the Intel CEO who is of Tibetan origin, or Taiwan origin, I'm not really sure, but he's of South East Asian origin. They have been, attacked, for maybe having allegiance to China, or maybe, being outsiders to the US. So that protectionism has now crept in. So US, being a potboiler of talent, has now tried to, segregate people and say that, you go back to your homes and you go back to your places, and America first and make America great again. So in that aspect, for your country and for mine, what is it that we can start doing from today? Like, I want you to start thinking like a prime minister, because the CEO is the president now. So it's not, far away that you and I probably step up in these roles and try to lead society.
Okay, once again, quite a bit to unpack, and two very important chapters in basically in my book. Now, everything they describe is very much a foreturning. Once again, sorry, repeating that all the time. This chaos is something you would expect. Now, if you look at long-term trends, because still this is in human history a blip on the radar screen, what's very important, I think, for India is the demographics. They have the saying, I don't know whether you have it in India, but here we have the saying, the hand that rocks the cradle controls the world. And if you
Hmm.
look at demographics, in our book, we look at the period of 2100. Well, the world population will have stabilized. The Chinese population will have halved almost. The Japanese population will have halved. In Europe, it's not that much better. The US will remain more or less stable. India will have a very nice demographics, and the only continent where you will see growth is Africa. Africa is at the moment 1 billion people, in 2050 2 billion people, and in 2100 4 billion people. So there are some places where there is still demographic growth. So that's extremely, extremely important. And that's more important than who is the president the next 2 years, because then we talk about the next 30, 40 years. Within economics, you know very well, as I do, that it's very hard to predict. But the part in economics that's the best to predict is of course demographics, because when you know the people who are born today, you know in 20 years time you will have a working population and you can calculate that. So if you make that projection, I think first of all India is very well positioned for that. Belgium will remain more or less stable, but the rest of Europe will also be in decline. China will India will, I think it's already the case, or it will certainly be the case. India has more people than China, and it will be only growing over the next.
We're already more than China. We're already more than
Yeah,
China. We are the most populous country in the world. It's not been marketed much because we
yeah,
see it as a shameful thing.
yeah. So, but that's your future. Huh? That's very important. And then secondly, very much attached to that, yeah, how you deal with this, and then we come back to this American exceptionalism where you say, okay, all our money is flowing toward the United States, we finance the debt, we buy the companies, and that's also a very big problem. And I do not know, but I think it will be more or less the same in India as in Europe. We have good innovation, we build new companies, but we do not market them very well, and we do not scale them up very well. So we have not developed in Europe a company, and I'm not even talking about an Apple or an Nvidia, which is 3,000 billion, 4,000 billion in market cap, but just take 100 billion. Okay, that's still a lot of money, but that's not an Apple. Well, we have not created a company like that in Europe for the last 30 years. If you look at our stock market indices, for example, the FTSE in the United Kingdom and so on, fantastic country. I love London. It's a hub for innovation, everything that you want. But if you look at the FTSE, the UK stock market index, these are all companies of 100 and 150 years old. So you do not build these new companies. So, and how then, if you ask the question, how do you do that then? Well, it starts with good education. It starts with innovation, that you create spin-offs and innovation hubs around your universities. You make good companies, but then you find a way to scale them up quickly, because in this world, speed is very important. Because if you have a good idea, a good product or whatever, but you're not able to build it quickly enough, somebody else will take it over, and that happens technology all over the world, and there the United States wins. So that's important. And then I want to come back, and then you raise extremely interesting points. So you need the innovation, you need the education, you need the way to keep the capital inside. But maybe, and that's also where I come from, the little country, the little kingdom of Belgium, where I live, sometimes we do not need to be arrogant, but sometimes you need to be audacious. You have to have confidence. You have to believe in yourself. And you have to be proud in a way where you say, look what we have done. That's something that I also try to create with my team and in the bank where we work, that we say we're proud of what we do. That's so important, because when you have that already, well, yeah, you can do anything. And that's maybe of all the things, you have the capital, you have the people, you have the innovation, but the belief that you can do it is maybe the strongest thing. There is a saying that say, oh, the people, and I'm a strategist, so people always say, hope is not a strategy. But sometimes I say, maybe hope is all that we have. But that's so important, hope and believe in yourself. And if indeed the US shuts its universities and so on, that's a pity. I love Harvard, I love Yale, I love Princeton, I love all these places. Okay, we have some nice as well in Europe. We have in Paris, we have Cambridge, we have Oxford in the UK and so on. We have a very good university in the city where I live, Leuven, and we're just one of the top 40 universities like that worldwide as well. So we have these things. So if you have some sort of people being locked out of the United States, well, eventually what they do is they organize a brain drain. Sometimes you have a brain drain. You talked about it, people who move to the Emirates and so on. That's something but they are organizing it. They're all putting away all the intelligent people that you need for the new companies. They say, we don't need you anymore. well, that's an opportunity for the rest of the world, because if you
Yes,
can,
happened. Yeah, when the tech layoffs happened, these people actually got a silver lining. They could make their own companies. Now, a
yeah,
company doesn't need to be out there in the media, doesn't need to be, out there on every Reuters and Bloomberg and every other organization out there. But still, you know, we have people who are successful even as small and medium term entrepreneurs. Now, when I talk about entrepreneurship, India has two great entrepreneurs. Okay, these are, the Tatas are there all around. They have investments in Europe as well. But right now, there's the Ambani versus Adani angle in India. So people are linking Gautam Adani's investments in India and Gujarat, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi comes from, as his reason to not, to not be able to stand up to Trump's tariffs, because there is a factor of how Adani's probe, there was a probe that was being led, and there was a fear that, that will, and there was a question also in the White House which was targeted to Modi towards to Gautam Adani, and he said very categorically that we do not discuss individuals here. But then Pakistan, when Asif Munir was in the US, he has spoken about how Reliance chief Mukesh Ambani also is in the radar of Pakistan, because now they're making open nuclear threats. And this is ironical because they're pitching for a Nobel Peace Prize for Trump, and they're talking of nuclear war. So that doesn't go hand in hand. Peace and terrorism cannot go hand in hand. So now I can see that people like you and me are talking politics. And if we have big investments in a country or in a group of countries or in a group of states, then we are also on the radar of terrorists and such arsonist states, such anarchist states like Pakistan. So, we can't avoid a CEO, even Germany, when you were talking about Friedrich Merz, he has been in the private sector, he was in the political party of his, like during Angela Merkel's time, and then, he took a step back, and when she retired or she left, he came back. So corporate and politics is not going anywhere, they are hand in hand. And now the threats are directed not to politicians but to businessmen. So what is the sentiment for somebody like you? You might be a Mukesh Ambani of your own right, just putting your head down, doing your stock exchanges, but having opinions for your clients, like probably a Jeffries or a Goldman Sachs, because you have to study the political volatility, the demography, the other factors in geopolitics, along with the economics of things, the macro and the micro, both economics have to go hand in hand. So in that respect, I don't see a favorable picture, like with Musk having the American party, but then there is a direct threat to India's, richest billionaire and somebody who's also in the Forbes list worldwide. Where do you see all of this panning out?
well, it's clear indeed that you cannot be an economist or you cannot be a strategist without looking at geopolitics, because all the big important moves that you see in markets are driven by a tweet somewhere or a decision somewhere, or unfortunately a war somewhere, or all these things. Independence of the Fed, very important. The Fed being the stabilizing factor in the United States, now also under pressure by the Trump administration. So these are very important things. And clearly the link, like I said before, the link between government and business has become closer. When you want to make an investment these days, you also look at the country. You look at the area, you look where is this company located? Do I have confidence in the government? Do I have confidence that the government is not going to take everything away, that they're going to nationalize it? Have they a good industrial policy? That kind of thing. So you cannot separate the two anymore. They're very closely related. On the other hand, we should be careful not only to focus on the noise, but we should also focus on the signal. And at the end of the day, you have to buy a good company, and you have to buy a company where you have confidence. And that gives me hope, because the book that we've written, we very often talk about the young wizards that are going to change the world, to improve the world. And I always, when I sign a book, I very often write, this world needs more wizards and less prophets. We don't need people telling us that we're all going to die. Well, we need people who invent the smart grid and then the batteries of the future and so on. And I know in India, like in Europe and other places in the world, there is somewhere a smart guy, a brilliant guy who is solving a mathematical problem or an industrial problem from his dorm or somewhere in a small house, and is going to change the world. And that's something that we need to believe. So I think, we should clearly look at geopolitics. We cannot afford not to look at it because it has become so important. And in this fragmented world, having a good industrial policy for a country and have stability is hugely important. You cannot invest even in a very good company when it's located in an area of the world where you don't want to invest. That's clear. But on the other hand, we also have to believe, I think, in the innovation, in the thing that people, young people, but also older people will do. And I think there is still opportunity because I work for companies and I work for investors. So I do both sides. So in companies, you look at risks, currency risk, interest rate risk, inflation risk, operational risk. So we help them to control these risks. On the investment side, we of course try to do as good as we can, and we try to make money. So this is a complicated world, but that I think that your audience also should realize, and I hope believe when I say this. I've been doing this since I was 12, so that's already quite a number of years. I see massive risks. I see massive threats. I see a very complicated world, but I also have never seen so much opportunity. And I think we should not be blind for the opportunity either. But it's a complicated world, and that's exactly what you expect in a forthturning world. It's complicated. It's messy. But that does not mean there are no opportunities.
That actually sums up the entire discussion. And Philippe, I am so indebted for your time. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that the viewers will also learn a lot from your expertise and from your brilliant thoughts. And for anyone who wants to read more into Philippe's work, the link is below. You can definitely order his book, and it's a reservoir for knowledge. And thank you so much for doing this again, and keep watching NeUp for the latest news and updates.
Thank you for having me.